Oh, hello viewers. Another beautiful day. Hope your five senses work, health and strength is good or excellent. Yep. Look, PC Games N try to do the Nintendo Switch 2 versus Steam Deck GPU. But the last time I checked, if you remember, they had a picture of this Steam Deck and the Switch 2 in one picture, and they were talking about the console wars. They were showing favoritism to Nintendo, but now they come back now they want to do a GPU battle. But I got something to say about this GPU battle though. The difference between the Switch, the Wii U had a powerful GPU, had a powerful GPU. But the only problem the Wii U was facing is that Nintendo had a 3DS. That was in the Wii U's way. Okay? That was the biggest problem with the Wii U. It was the 3DS. It wasn't sales, it wasn't marketing. All that stuff is lies for beginners who don't know video games. But for people like me that's been playing for years, we know that the sales marketing argument was a lie. Anyway, listen to this. It says while the Switch 2 versus Steam Deck meme war plays out on social media, I'm in the enviable position of owning both handhelds at the moment, and I love both for different reasons. There's a lot of talk about GPU power though, and I'm not much in the way of to back it up. After all, you can easily benchmark Switch 2. You can, however, take a good look at the two devices' GPU and make a decent prediction, which is what I'm going to do here. It says here, I'm not going to tell you which is the best gaming handheld of the two, as that's largely down to the games you want to play and the user experience you prefer. But I can pull apart the inner workings of AMD GPU inside the Steam Deck GPU, as well as the new NVIDIA GPU inside the Switch 2, and give you an idea of how they perform. It says here, let's start with the handheld gaming everyone is discussing right now, which is the Switch 2. Not really. It says here, neither Nintendo nor NVIDIA officially revealed the core specs of the GPU. But Digital Foundry recent excellent analysis has, for all the intent and purpose, confirmed that the rumors about it were true. It's based on NVIDIA Ampere architecture and contains 1,536 CUDA cores. These are the tiny basic processors that work together to render the graphics in your games. The more you have, the faster your frame rates. And then it says, from that information and from what we already know about the structure of the Ampere architecture, we can infer that it's very probable all contain 12 RT cores for ray tracing and 48 tensor cores for AI work such as DLSS. Comparatively, GPU in the Steam Deck is based on AMD RDNA2 architecture, which comes from the same generation as Ampere architecture used in the Switch 2. So its architecture is of similar age, despite the Switch 2 only coming out this year. The specs of the GPU are well documented, and it contains 5 12-stream processors. That doesn't mean it only has a third of the power of the Switch 2 1,536 CUDA cores, though as the numbers aren't analogous. It says here, it also has 8 RT cores for ray tracing and no AI hardware, although it can support AMD FSR tech to improve the frame rates further, but bear in mind that this doesn't include FSR 4. And it says that the version of FSR support by the Steam Deck have poorer image quality than DLSS. Both GPU also employs a 128 memory interface and share LPDDR5 RAM with their CPUs. It says, but which is faster? How fast is the Switch 2 GPU? From my crude calculation, the Switch 2 GPU is around 53% faster than the Steam Deck GPU. It says when it comes to basic rendering power, but stop right there. The Wii U had a powerful GPU than the PS3 and the 360. But in the Wii U situation, the Wii U can run the games the 360 and PS3 had. The biggest problem with the Wii U was the 3DS. Nintendo had a cartridge versus CD problem that they created between the 3DS and the Wii U, and none of these Nintendo YouTubers didn't tell you this. They can't even explain it. They'll try to throw sales numbers in your face because that's all they know. Anyway, it says, before I give you the full breakdown, the full rundown, though, I will preface these numbers with a disclaimer, which is that these results are based on figures from a Windows test rig with an AMD Ryzen 9 5900X CPU using CPU with a dedicated VRAM. They're not intended to tell you the exact frame rate you can expect from the Steam Deck and Switch 2 GPUs, but they can give you an indication of the relative rendering power. And then it says the figure also doesn't control the difference in clock speed and TDP. The Switch runs the GPU clock speed at very different frequencies, which it's in dock mode, for example, and the two devices target different TDPs for the chips. This is more of a back of a napkin calculation to look at basic parallel rendering power rather than a foolproof equation. Anyway, I have run several test games at maximum settings at 1920 by 1080 without ray tracing for FSR/DLSS on an AMD Radeon RX 6600, RDNA 2, and an NVIDIA GeForce RTX 3050 Ampere. The test games include Assassin's Creed Valhalla, Cyberpunk 2077, and Metro Exodus. Says here both GPUs have a 128 memory interface and use 8 gigs of 14 gigabytes per second GDDR6 video RAM, so the results are roughly comparable. Beyond the difference between the GPU, the Radeon RX 6600 was more expensive than the RTX 3050 when it came out, and is faster across the board. But we can account for that by factoring the number of stream processors into the calculations. And then it says the mean average frame rate for the Radeon RX 6600 in these tests is 66 frames per second, while the results for the RTX 3050 is 48. Bear in mind that these results don't include ray tracing, though, where the Ampere architecture is significantly quicker than RDNA 2. I am just providing an idea of relative rendering power, especially as ray tracing will be a tough ask on a handheld GPU. It says here, anyway, in these figures you can then work out roughly how many CUDA cores or stream processors are required to generate an average of 1 FPS in these games, like these games that 27 stream processors per 1 FPS for RDNA 2 GPU and 53 CUDA cores per 1 FPS for Ampere GPU. We can then predict the same rate for the two GPUs if they had 512 stream processors and 1536 CUDA core respectively. And it says again, bear in mind that this is a crude calculation. Neither the Switch 2 nor the Steam Deck runs on Windows. They share system memory. They also use different GPUs, while the Switch 2 games will have settings that are heavily optimized for the hardware. As such, the results from an actual Steam Deck or Switch 2 are likely to be different. These calculations are only designed to show the difference between the two GPUs at a theoretical level. And what else we got here? It says here, the prediction from these calculations is that all other factors being equal, the Switch 2 GPU should average around 29 FPS in these games at these settings. If it's used Windows or same CPU and had 8 gigs of dedicated GDDR6 for video RAM, Meanwhile, the Steam Deck GPU should average around 19 FPS under the same circumstance. Basically, although they're based on architectures from the same generation, the Switch 2 has considerably more rendering horsepower than the Steam Deck. says here, of course, the GPU isn't the only defining feature of a handheld, with the screen, battery life, storage, CPU, and gaming catalog all being a factor to consider on this metric. And it says, though the Switch 2 wins, the victory may well be short-lived, though, with an AMD Ryzen AI Z2 Extreme handheld gaming CPU offering 16 3.5 compute units. And then it says 16 3.5 computer units, for example, which equates to 1024 stream processors. And last but not least, here it says here, in terms of rendering power, that's twice as powerful as the Steam Deck. The GPU, before you even factor in the improved performance from the jump to a GPU architecture, the Steam Deck 2 GPU may well end up leapfrogging the Switch 2 again. And the top-end newer Asus Xbox handhelds will also use this new chip. And then it says here, what he says here, I'll be taking a look at more of the difference between the Switch 2 and the Steam Deck over the next few weeks. But if you own the Steam Deck already, check out our guide for the best Steam Deck games, all of which have been tested by us on the handheld to ensure they work properly. And that is that. So yeah, took me 12 minutes. And anything else? That is that. So okay, the Switch 2 has a better GPU, but when they highlight it here in black, it says the Switch 2 GPU is around 53% faster than the Steam Deck GPU. What came to my mind was the Wii U, because the Wii U's GPU was faster than the 360 and PS3, and then and then it could have run some games that were on the PS4. But the problem with the Wii U was it was never sales. It was a 3DS that was in the Wii U's way. So yeah, sales is not the issue here. Sales is not the issue. So the Steam Deck, not the Steam Deck. When it comes to the, when it comes to the Wii U, when it comes to the Switch, sure it has a higher GPU, but the Wii U now had a higher GPU, and like I said, sales was never the issue here. Sales was never the issue. With the Wii U, it was just a 3DS in the Wii U's way. So yeah, but Switch 2 is out now, so CPU wise, I don't think it's faster than the Steam Deck. So we'll see what they say about that. But other than that, the Steam Deck is running games where the Switch fails to do it. So yeah, and 12 gigs of RAM of DDR5X versus 16, the Steam Deck wins. So yeah. But other than that, man, that was a good article that they just put up. And see what they do on the next one. But Switch 2 is out now, and Steam Deck right now is out of stock. Anyway, hope you enjoyed the video. Nice talking to you people again. Chris, still Star Wars, Star Trek, Port, Dark Side. I'm gone. Peace.